Story begins. The old man ran his thumb along the underside of the table and laughed softly, the way a person laughs when they already know the ending of a joke nobody else has heard yet. "Ma'am," he said, "this table isn't worth what you paid to have it hauled here. The joints are loose, the veneer's cracked, and somebody refinished it badly 30 years ago." The young woman who had brought it in nodded, embarrassed, ready to apologize and leave. But the old man's thumb had stopped moving. His smile had faded. His fingers were resting on a seam that should not have been there, a hairline gap in the wood where no gap belonged. He pressed it once, and somewhere deep inside the table, something clicked. He pulled his hand back as if the wood had burned him, and in a voice that no longer sounded like a tired appraiser, he said, "Where did you get this? From which town in the world are you watching this story today? Drop your location in the comments. If you've ever wondered how many ordinary things in ordinary rooms are hiding extraordinary truths, stay until the end. Because within 3 hours of that click, 2 federal agents would be standing in this man's workshop, and one of them would lower his voice and ask the old carpenter a question that no one had asked him in over 40 years. The workshop sat at the end of a gravel lane outside a small town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the trees pressed close to the road and the mist hung in the low fields until almost noon. The sign above the door read, "Hollinger Restorations," in letters that had faded from black to gray. Inside, the air smelled of linseed oil and sawdust and the faint sweetness of old shellac. Walter Hollinger had worked in that room for as long as anyone in town could remember. He was 78 years old, broad in the shoulders despite his age, with hands that were thick and scarred and remarkably steady. His hair was white and cut short. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky, and they missed almost nothing. People in town knew Walter the way you know a fixture. He repaired their grandmother's rocking chairs and their father's roll-top desks. He refused payment from widows. He showed up to church socials and said little and left early. He had no wife that anyone could recall, no children, no family photographs on the walls of his shop. When asked about his past, he would say only that he had done some traveling before he settled down, and then he would change the subject so smoothly that people forgot they had even asked. He was, by every visible measure, a quiet old craftsman living out the long, slow end of an unremarkable life. But that was not the full story. The young woman's name was Dana Reyes. She was 24, a graduate student in furniture conservation at a state university 2 hours away, and she had inherited the table from a great-aunt she had barely known. The aunt, a woman named Margaret, had died alone in a nursing home that spring, and among the few belongings she left behind was this heavy, ugly, dark-stained table that nobody in the family wanted. Dana had taken it because she felt sorry for it, and because she thought it might make a good practice piece for her studies. She had driven it out to Hollinger Restorations because her professor had mentioned, once, in passing, that the old man in the hills near Latrobe knew more about period joinery than anyone teaching in any university. Walter was still staring at the table. "I asked you a question," he said gently now. "Where did this come from?" "My great-aunt," Dana said. "Margaret Voss. She passed away a few months ago. I don't really know where she got it. Why? Is something wrong?" Walter did not answer right away. He pulled a stool up to the table and lowered himself onto it slowly, his knees stiff. He set both hands flat on the surface, the way a man might rest his hands on something living. Then he turned the table on its side, with a strength that surprised Dana, and pointed to a spot beneath the apron where the rail met the leg. "Look here," he said. "What do you see?" Dana crouched and looked. "A joint, a mortise and tenon, I think." "Look again." She looked closer, and then she saw it. The wood grain on one side of the joint did not quite match the grain on the other. The 2 pieces had been cut and fitted so perfectly that from a foot away they appeared to be a single solid block. But they were not. There was a line, and along that line, almost invisible, was the faint pressure of a mechanism. "That's not a repair," Dana whispered. "That's a hidden compartment." "That," Walter said, "is a false rail, and it was not built by your great-aunt." He paused. "It was built to never be found." And that's when Dana noticed that the old man's steady hands had begun, very slightly, to tremble. Walter did not open the compartment. Not then. He told Dana that the table needed to sit overnight so he could assess the moisture content, which was a thing carpenters sometimes said, but which made no sense in this particular case. He told her to come back in the morning, and Dana, who was tired and confused and a little unnerved by the look on the old man's face, agreed. She drove back to her apartment in the city and lay awake most of the night thinking about the line in the wood. What she did not know was that the moment her car disappeared down the gravel lane, Walter Hollinger locked the workshop door, turned off the lights, and sat alone in the dark for a very long time. He had built that table. Not a table like it. That table. He had built it with his own hands in the winter of 1981 in a government workshop that did not appear on any map, under a name that was not Walter Hollinger, for a program that the United States government had spent the next 4 decades pretending never existed. But to understand that, you have to go back further. You have to understand who Walter had been before he became a kindly old man who fixed rocking chairs. He had been born under a different name in a different state. And by the time he was 22, he was the best Finnish carpenter the United States Marshal Service had ever quietly employed. He had a gift that could not be taught, an instinct for wood, for how grain moved and where weight settled and how to hide a thing inside another thing so completely that even the person who owned it would never suspect. In the early 1970s, a man in a gray suit had come to the small cabinet shop where he worked and offered him a job he was not allowed to describe to his own mother. The job was this: to build furniture for people who were being erased. The Federal Witness Protection Program needed more than new names and new towns. It needed places for the protected to hide the one thing they could never let go of: the evidence, the ledgers, the photographs, the proof that could send a crime family's leadership to prison for the rest of their lives. A safe could be cracked, a floorboard could be pried up, but a dining table, an ordinary heavy table sitting in an ordinary dining room with a compartment built so seamlessly into its structure that it became part of the wood itself, that could sit in plain sight for 30 years and never give up its secret. Walter built those tables. He built desks and bookcases and headboards and window seats. He built hiding places for the lives of people he would never meet. And then he was driven away and told to forget the address, the face, the name. He had built hundreds of pieces over 15 years, and every single one had vanished into the country, scattered into safe houses and relocated families, each one carrying its silent cargo. He never knew the names of the people who received them. That was the rule. That was the safety. He was a ghost building hiding places for other ghosts. And then, in 1986, the program changed. New methods, digital records, off-site secure storage. The old craft of the hidden compartment was deemed obsolete, a relic of an earlier, more analog age of secrecy. Walter was thanked for his service in a windowless room by a man whose name he never learned, given a final identity, a modest sum of money, and a single instruction that he had carried like a stone in his chest for almost 40 years. You were never here. None of this happened. If you are ever contacted, you contact us. You do not speak. So he had taken the name Walter Hollinger. He had driven into the hills of western Pennsylvania. He had opened a small restoration shop. And he had spent 4 decades waiting for a knock that never came, fixing furniture for people who thought he was nobody, growing old inside a silence so complete it had become a kind of home. Until a graduate student walked through his door with a table he had built with his own 2 hands. He recognized it the instant he touched the false rail. He recognized the dovetails he had cut, the secret spring he had filed by hand from a single piece of brass, the particular way he had always set the hidden seam a 1/4 inch off-center so that the eye would slide right past it. There was no doubt. None. He could have identified his own work blindfolded, by feel alone. And what frightened him, sitting alone in the dark, was not that the table had surfaced. It was the question that followed instantly behind it. If the table was here, then the family it had been built for was gone. And if that family was gone, then either the program had finally released its secrets, or something had gone very, very wrong. But that wasn't even the worst of it, because Walter knew something about the compartment in that particular table that he had spent 4 decades trying not to remember. He knew what kind of thing it had been built to hold, and he knew that some secrets, once they finally come loose, do not come loose quietly. The next morning, Dana arrived at 8 to find Walter already at the workbench, the table upright in the center of the room, surrounded by an array of fine tools laid out with surgical precision. He looked as though he had not slept. He probably had not. "I want to show you something," he said. "But first I need you to understand that once you see this, you can't unsee it, and it may put you in a position you didn't ask to be in." Dana, who was 24 and curious, and had no idea what she was agreeing to, said, "Okay." Walter pressed the seam. He pressed a second point she had not noticed, beneath the opposite rail, and with a soft mechanical sigh, a panel slid free along the underside of the table, revealing a shallow compartment perhaps 2 feet long and 4 inches deep, lined with felt that had gone gray with age. Inside lay a flat object wrapped in oilcloth. Walter lifted it out with both hands. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a leather portfolio, cracked and stiff, and inside the portfolio was a thick sheaf of documents, photographs, typed pages, a ledger bound in black, and on top of it all, a single sealed envelope, yellowed with age, with a name written across the front in faded fountain pen. The name was not Margaret Voss. The name was Salvatore Aiello. Walter went very still. Dana watched the color leave his face. "Who is that?" she asked. "I don't know," Walter said quietly. He set the envelope down as though it might detonate. But a name written on a sealed envelope, hidden inside a table built like this, is a name somebody was meant to be terrified of. And if these are the papers I think they are, then your great-aunt was not who you think she was either. The room had gone very quiet. Outside, a truck passed on the distant highway and faded. Walter looked at the ledger, at the photographs, at the documents that he himself had sealed inside that table with his own hands in a workshop that had been bulldozed before Dana was even born. "I need to make a phone call," he said, "and then I need you to leave and not come back and forget you ever brought this here." "What? No. That's my table. That's my aunt's. Listen to me." Walter's voice was not loud, but something in it stopped her cold, a register of authority she had not heard from the gentle old man the day before. 40 years ago, things were put in this country to keep certain people alive. Some of those people are still alive. And the men who hunted them, some of them are still alive too. And so are their children and their children's children. This is not a school project. Do you understand me? This is a list of names of people who were supposed to disappear forever. But before he could reach the phone, before Dana could decide whether to argue or run, the bell above the workshop door chimed. 2 men stepped inside. They wore civilian clothes that did not quite work as civilian clothes, the collars too crisp, the shoes too clean for a gravel road. The way they entered the room not casually, but in a careful sweep, eyes moving to the corners, to the exits, to Walter's hands. The first was tall and lean, perhaps 50, with close-cropped grey hair. The second was younger and broader, and he positioned himself slightly to the side, near the door, in a way that was not accidental. "Mr. Hollinger?" the older one said pleasantly. "I wonder if you could spare us a few minutes." Walter did not move. His pale eyes went from one man to the other, and Dana saw something pass across his face that she could not name. Recognition, maybe, or memory, or fear. "Who's asking?" Walter said. The older man produced a thin leather wallet and let it fall open. A badge, an identification card with a blue seal. "Special Agent Thomas Caro," he said. "This is Agent Bishop. We're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." He let the wallet close. "We're here about a table." Dana's heart began to pound. She looked at Walter, and Walter was looking at the agent with an expression of such profound and weary calm that it was almost worse than panic. "How did you find it?" Walter said. It was not a question. "A database flag," Caro said. 2 days ago. A furniture conservation lab at the State University ran a routine analysis on an antique table for a student project. Standard procedure, they photograph the joinery, log the construction details, upload it to a shared archive of period techniques. He paused. One of those construction details matched a profile that has been sitting in a sealed federal file since 1981. The hidden compartment design, the off-center seam, the hand-filed brass mechanism. There were only ever a handful of people in the world who could build a joint like that, Mr. Hollinger. As of this morning, we believe only one of them is still living. The workshop was silent. Dana realized with a slow horror that she was the one who had uploaded those photographs. Her project, her professor's archive. She had brought the table into the light without ever knowing what light it would draw. And you are? Caro turned to her, not unkindly. Dana Reyes, she managed. It's my table. I mean, it was my great-aunt's. I didn't know. No, Caro said. I don't imagine you did. What happened next changed everything. Walter set the leather portfolio on the workbench, on top of the open compartment, in plain view. You came faster than I expected, he said. Faster than they ever did before. Nobody came before. 40 years, and nobody came. He let out a breath that seemed to empty something out of him. I always wondered if the program even remembered I existed. Caro stepped closer, his eyes on the documents. Mr. Hollinger, I'm going to be honest with you, because I think you've earned it. The program you worked for was wound down in stages over 3 decades. Most of the records were destroyed or sealed. The people who ran it are dead. The craftsmen who built for it are dead. When that database flag came up, half the people in my office thought it was an error, a ghost in the system. The other half had never heard of the program at all. He looked up. I'm one of the few people left who knows it was real, and I need to know what's in that portfolio. You don't know? Walter asked. The file we have describes the technique. It doesn't describe the contents. Whatever was placed inside these pieces was placed there by the protected families, not by the builders. You sealed it. You never knew what you were hiding. Walter looked down at the envelope with the name Salvatore Aiello written across it. I knew about this one, he said, and the room seemed to tilt. Walter sat back down on his stool because his legs would no longer hold him, and he began, for the first time in 40 years, to talk. Dana stood frozen against the workbench. Agent Bishop quietly moved to the door and turned the latch, and the small sound of it locking made the moment feel suddenly sealed, as though the 4 of them had been closed into a vault together. There was one job, Walter said, that wasn't like the others. The rule was always that I never met the family. I built the piece. It was crated. It went away. I never knew where. But in the winter of 1981 they brought me out to a safe house instead of the workshop. They'd never done that. They said the piece had to be built and fitted on site, that it couldn't travel finished, that it had to match an existing dining set in a house the family was already living in. He shook his head slowly. And there was a woman there, young, sharp, frightened in a way she was working very hard not to show. She had a little girl with her, and she watched me work for 3 days. And on the last day, when the table was done and the compartment was set, she put a leather portfolio inside it herself, and she sealed an envelope and laid it on top, and she said something to me that I was not supposed to hear and have never forgotten. He stopped. What did she say? Caro asked softly. She said, if anyone ever opens this, it means I'm gone, and the man who put me here is the one who finally got me. His name is in the envelope. Make sure they don't bury it with me. Walter's hands were trembling openly now. I wasn't supposed to know names. I wasn't supposed to know anything. But she told me hers, because she said someone had to remember her if it all went wrong. Her name was Margaret. And the little girl was maybe 4 years old, and she had a great niece who would be born many years later. A great niece who would one day inherit an ugly old table that nobody wanted. Walter raised his eyes, and they were wet, and they were fixed on Dana. You have her chin, he said. I saw it the second you walked in yesterday. I just didn't let myself believe it. Dana could not breathe. The room was spinning. Her great-aunt Margaret, the woman who died alone in a nursing home, the woman the family had quietly pitied for her strangeness, her refusal to talk about the past, her habit of sitting with her back to the wall in any room she entered. "She was in witness protection," Dana whispered, "my whole life, and nobody knew. And nobody was supposed to know," Caro said. "That's the entire point." He turned to Walter. "Mr. Hollinger, the name in that envelope. Do you know who Salvatore Aiello is?" "No," Walter said. "I only ever saw the name. I never opened the envelope. That wasn't mine to open." Caro and Bishop exchanged a long look. "Salvatore Aiello," Caro said slowly, "is not a man who is dead. Salvatore Aiello is a man who, as of last year, sits on the board of 3 charitable foundations, owns a string of legitimate businesses across 4 states, and has had his record so thoroughly laundered that he is invited to political fundraisers. He is 81 years old and considered a respectable pillar of his community. There has never been enough evidence to touch him. The witnesses who could have testified against him all died, or vanished, or recanted decades ago." He paused. "One of them, the most important one, was a young woman who disappeared into protection in 1981 and was reported to have died in a car accident in 1984. The case against Aiello collapsed without her. He walked free. He has been free ever since." The silence in the room was total. "And you're telling me," Caro continued, his voice very careful now, "that her testimony, her ledger, her documentation, the entire case that vanished 40 years ago, has been sitting inside a table in a nursing home and then in a graduate student's apartment this whole time?" Walter looked at the black ledger. "She told me it was everything. Account numbers, dates, names of the men who did the killing and the names of the men who ordered it. She said it was the only copy that he couldn't reach." He swallowed. She was right. He never reached it. She just ran out of time before anyone came looking. No one expected what came next, because at that moment Dana's phone, sitting on the workbench where she had set it down, lit up and began to buzz. An unknown number. She reached for it instinctively, and Caro said, "Wait." But she had already glanced at the screen, and the preview of a text message was visible there for all of them to read. It said, "We know what you have. We are willing to be generous. You have 1 hour to decide." The blood drained from Dana's face. "How?" she said. "How would anyone—" "The archive," Bishop said grimly, speaking for the first time. His voice was low and flat. "The university upload. If it flagged a federal database, it's possible it flagged other things too. People watch those databases. People with money. People who've spent 40 years waiting for exactly this." He looked at Caro. "We're not the only ones who saw it surface." Caro's expression had changed. The pleasant patience was gone. He was already moving, pulling out his own phone, speaking in clipped tones to someone on the other end. Bishop moved to the window and looked out at the gravel lane and the trees pressing close. "Mr. Hollinger," Caro said, lowering the phone, "I need to take that portfolio into federal custody immediately, and I need to get all 3 of us out of here now. If Aiello's people have the location, they could be minutes away." But Walter Hollinger did not move. He was looking at the table he had built, the table that had kept its secret faithfully for 40 years, longer than the woman who filled it, longer than the program that ordered it, longer than the men who thought they had buried the truth for good. And something was settling in his face, a resolve, a straightening of the spine, as though a weight he had carried for 4 decades was finally, at last, shifting toward the floor. "No," Walter said. Caro stopped. "I beg your pardon? You take those papers into federal custody," Walter said, "and they disappear into a sealed file like everything else did. 40 years, Agent. 40 years and nobody came. Nobody asked. The program forgot me. The country forgot her. That man Aiello went to fundraisers while Margaret died alone in a home, sitting with her back to the wall, waiting for a knock that never came." His voice was rising now, steady and certain, the voice of a man who had finally found the thing he was for. She didn't hide this so it could vanish again. She hid it so it would surface. So make sure they don't bury it with me, she said. Those were her words. And I am the only person left alive who heard them. He turned to Dana. There's a man, he said quickly. A reporter. I read his work for years. He covers organized crime. He's careful. He's honest. He's been writing about Aiello's businesses for a decade without ever being able to prove a thing. I never thought I'd have anything to give him. I never thought I could. He looked at Caro. You take the originals, that's the law, and I'll follow it. But before you do, that young woman is going to photograph every single page with her phone, right now, and the moment she's somewhere safe, those copies are going to a reporter and a federal prosecutor and 3 different newspapers at the same time. Because the only way to protect the truth is to make it impossible to lose. Caro stared at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, the agent did something Dana would remember for the rest of her life. He stepped back, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Photograph it, he said. Quickly. Dana's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the phone, but she did it. Page after page, the ledger, every entry, the photographs, every face, the typed testimony in Margaret's careful hand, and the envelope, which Caro opened at last with a pocket knife, sliding out a single sheet of paper covered in the small, precise handwriting of a frightened young woman who had known, even then, that she was running out of time. A full statement, a confession of everything she had witnessed, a name at the bottom, signed and dated, October 1981. They left through the back of the workshop, the 3 of them, while Bishop covered the lane. Caro drove. Dana sat in the back with the portfolio sealed in an evidence bag on the seat beside her, and Walter sat in front, an old man in a worn flannel shirt, watching the trees go by. "Why did you build them?" Dana asked him quietly, somewhere along the highway. "The hiding places, for all those years, for people you never met." Walter was quiet for a while. "Because somebody had to give them a place to keep the truth," he finally said. "A person can lose their name, their face, their whole life. But if there's one thing in the world that holds what really happened, one thing they can put their hand on in the dark and know it's still there, then they haven't lost everything. They haven't disappeared. Not completely." He looked out at the passing hills. "I spent my whole life making places for the truth to wait. I just never thought I'd live long enough to see one of them open." Salvatore Aiello was arrested 11 days later. It did not happen quietly. The story broke across 3 newspapers on the same morning, and by the time his lawyers understood what was happening, the documents were already in the hands of a federal prosecutor who had inherited the cold case from a predecessor who had inherited it from a predecessor. The ledger was authenticated. The handwriting was matched. The account numbers, impossibly, some of them still led somewhere. And the statement, the signed and dated statement of a witness long thought dead, was entered into the record 43 years after it was written. Aiello was 81 years old when they led him out of his home, and the cameras caught him blinking in the morning light. An old man in a fine coat, who had spent 4 decades believing the past was a thing you could outlive. He had been wrong. The truth had simply been waiting, inside a table, in the dark, more patient than any man. Dana testified at a preliminary hearing about how she had come to possess the table. Walter did not testify in public. His identity, even now, remained partly sealed, a courtesy the government extended at last to a man it had spent 40 years pretending not to know. But a federal prosecutor came to his workshop one afternoon, alone, and sat across from him and asked him to walk through the construction of the compartment so that the evidence could be properly entered. And when they were finished, the prosecutor, a woman in her 40s, stood and looked at the old man for a long moment. "My grandmother was a protected witness," she said quietly. "Different case, different state. I never knew until she died. I always wondered who built the desk she kept her papers in. She used to touch it sometimes, just rest her hand on it, and she'd get this look." The prosecutor's voice caught. "I think maybe it was someone like you." "Maybe," Walter said. There were a few of us. Thank you, she said, for all of it, for all of them. Walter only nodded. There was one more thing, near the end. After the trial was set, and the documents were secured and the danger had passed, Caro returned to the workshop one last time, alone, on a grey afternoon. He brought the table with him in the back of a federal vehicle. It had been processed, photographed, entered into evidence, and now released, no longer needed, just an old piece of furniture again. "Miss Reyes asked us to bring it to you," Caro said. "She thought you should have it. She said you'd know what to do with it." Walter ran his hand along the surface of the table he had built in another life, under another name, for a frightened young woman and her 4-year-old daughter in the winter of 1981. The compartment was empty now. Its long task was done. The truth it had guarded for 4 decades was finally out in the world where it could no longer be buried. "There's something I never told anyone," Walter said, not looking up. "In all those years, all those pieces I built, I always left one mark, a signature, you might call it, except no one was ever supposed to find it." He turned the table on its side and pointed to a spot inside the empty compartment on the felt-lined wood, where, almost invisible, 2 letters were carved so small you would need a magnifying glass to see them. They were not his real initials. They were not Walter Hollinger's either. They were the initials of the name he had been born with, the name he had given up the day he disappeared. "So that someday," he said, "somebody would know I was real, that I existed, that I wasn't a ghost." He smiled, and it was the first true smile Dana had ever seen on him, weeks later, when she came to visit and he showed her too. "Funny thing, I spent 40 years building places to keep other people from disappearing, and the whole time, I was the one who'd vanished." Caro looked at the carved initials for a long moment. "You're in the record now, Mr. Hollinger," he said. "All of it. Sealed, but real. Your service, your name, the real one. When the last of the seals come off, and they will, someday there'll be a file that says you were here, that you did this, that none of it was nothing." Walter Hollinger, born under another name, builder of hiding places, keeper of the truth's long patience, set his weathered hand flat on the table one last time. "That's all I ever wanted," he said. "The workshop at the end of the gravel lane is still there. The sign still reads Hollinger Restorations, though Walter is older now and works fewer hours, and a young woman named Dana drives out most weekends to learn the things he knows, the joinery, the grain, the way wood holds weight and time, and, when built by the right hands, the truth itself. The ugly old table sits in the corner of the shop. People sometimes ask about it. Walter only ever says it belonged to a brave woman once, and that it kept a promise for a very long time. And every now and then, when the shop is empty and the light is low, the old man rests his hand on the wood and thinks of a frightened young mother in a safe house in the winter of 1981, and the words she gave him to carry, and the 4 decades he kept them, and the morning a graduate student walked through his door and finally set them free. Have you ever discovered that someone you thought you knew had been carrying an entire hidden life? Share their story in the comments. And if you believe that the truth, no matter how deeply it's buried or how long it waits, always finds its way back into the light, then subscribe. Because there are more of these stories than you could ever imagine, sitting in ordinary rooms, in ordinary objects, waiting for the right hands to open them.